Welcome to the Long Take Review. I'm your host, Jen Bankard, and I'm here with my friends, she said. Men like my first co-host can be found drifting like seaweed all over the world. They're not particularly bad men, but they're not good men either. It's PT McNiff. How's it going, PT?
Something extremely unpleasant was about to happen. I was sure of that. Something sinister and cruel, but I had to see it now. Hello, Jen. I'm well. How are you?
Oh, that was great. Oh, now there's just like a sense of dread washing over me. And my next co-host had a small, frail body. His face was freckled, and he wore spectacles with thick lenses. It's Greg Cass. Sorry, apparently this destroyed PT, and I'm laughing now. How's it going, Greg?
Help. 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 Hello. It's good to be here. I am sure that only about a third of our listeners could hear my brilliant reference to Poison, the fourth of our shorts we're talking about tonight. Jen, what are we talking about tonight?
Oh, yeah, that probably made sense to maybe two people listening to this at this point, in which we've lost everyone else. Well, it's fall movie season. I'm so glad you asked, Greg, which means we will have not one, but two eyes on the Oscar race. We're kicking off next week with our first big contender of the season, Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon, which we are all very excited for. So just a quick reminder, if you don't want to miss those episodes when they drop, please follow the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcasts. So we host the feed through Substack. You can subscribe there, but you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I believe Greg uses Overcast.
I also use Overcast, but people like Pocket Casts. Does Stitcher still exist? I know there's a network file. Anyway, wherever you listen, go find us.
And you may have figured out, if you've seen them already, based on our little interlude at the beginning, we are here today to review 4 new short films by Wes Anderson, and they are all adapted from short stories by Roald Dahl. Hence the like long-winded sort of droll descriptions that we used at the beginning. They are all available now on Netflix. So if you listen to our Asteroid City review over the summer, you probably know that we're all big Wes Anderson fans. And Greg, on a previous episode, was just so sad, saying that we probably wouldn't have a chance to do a separate review of these shorts. Guess what, Greg? We're here. We're doing it. He just did a like little fist pump wave. If you're listening to us for the first time, we'll have a spoiler-free section designed for those who have not yet seen these 4 short films. And with a very clear alert, we will shift into spoiler mode. And actually, today we're going to share our rankings. Since there are 4 of them, that's enough for us to rank, apparently. So we're gonna do some rankings and just talk about them kind of in a more spoilery fashion after a certain point. So if you are intrigued by our shenanigans in these first few minutes, go to Netflix, watch the episodes, and come back and listen to the whole episode. Or if you just want to kind of listen to us see what we recommend about these and then go watch them, that is up to you. But first, we're going to do a quick movie news check-in. And unfortunately, the most important news right now is bad news for the actor strike. I know that we were all kind of optimistic when the writers made their deal and everything seemed like it was looking up. Maybe this thing is finally over. Actors just need to make their deal. So the WGA struck a deal on September 27th. But the news this week is that negotiations between SAG-AFTRA and the AMPTP, hopefully I got that right, the studios, has been suspended, I believe is the word that they used. Not good. LA Times even said the sides remain too divided, and so they just decided to stop negotiating altogether. And from what I could gather, it sounded like this big sticking point were the residuals, so the additional revenue that actors would get from streaming shows in particular that they appear in. And that's apparently like a really hard thing to find a compromise on. So have either of you sort of been following this or want to add anything?
I mean, the big sort of, I guess, spin that I saw from the two sides was the producers / studios saying, well, the actors are turning down the deal that the directors and writers took. So, what are we going to do about that? And the actors are saying they came back with an offer that's lower in terms of, the actual amount of money that actors will be able to make. It's lower than their initial offer, like the studio's initial offer. So the studios are just taking things off the table for them. It sounds like there were aspects of the writers' strike and what they were negotiating in terms of writers' rooms and ensuring that there were people credited to different things and how those credits would work that were unique to the writers' place. So they were sort of more okay, I guess, with the residuals being where they ended up, whereas the actors don't have exactly the same concerns, and so the residuals are more prominent, so they are holding their ground a little bit more around that.
The spin out today, and while we are sneaking our recording in a little early, we should say we are recording on the 12th of October in case this story changes somehow over the weekend. But
that's a good call.
The story today is that SAG is saying they were just asking for 2% of streaming revenues, and that's what got rejected. So we'll, have to see what that ends up looking like. But it sure looks bad in the wider world right now when you 2% and the studios denied it. The only other tidbit I saw this week that I loved is that the AMPTP is looking to change their name. And essentially that means they've gotten so much bad press this week and over the last few months that they're like, hey, let's rebrand. So as we move forward, eventually, hopefully, they don't remember it was us. So I still think that means the actors have the upper hand. Certainly public opinion seems to be on their side. So I'm sure the producers come back soon.
For sure. And yeah, hopefully we can recover from this and get back on track. In less serious news, unless you're a Swiftie, that is, the Taylor's is all over my entertainment newsfeed. The Taylor Swift Eras, the concert film of the Eras tour, and I didn't bother looking up what the official title of the movie is actually, but apparently that premiered this week at the Grove, at the AMC theater at the Grove, and the big headline from the LA Times was that the Grove shut down. And it's a huge mall. It's my understanding. I haven't been there in a long time, but and so that was a big deal. And so movie podcasts have sort of been talking about this and joking about it, that this is a total takeover of movie theaters for a while. What do the two of you think? Do you feel like it's going to be is this beneficial to regular business for movie theaters in some way, or is this kind of just going to be a weird phenomenon that comes and goes?
Both. I think that it's a weird phenomenon that will come and go. There are likely going to be people who, are just into seeing this, and it's not like I'm back at the movie theaters. I'm returning. Mm-hmm. This is back in my rotation as an activity I'm going to do. But that's okay. Like that's fine. That's good revenue for the theaters, especially if there's a little bit of downtime anyway in the fall. I know we're happy here on the podcast to hype up Oscar season, but these are not necessarily big blockbuster movies that come out during the fall. So it seems like that'll be good, that there may be a movie that's driving a lot of revenue in between the late summer releases and the holiday, Thanksgiving into Christmas holiday season money generating movies. And I will just say, sorry, Greg, that it's called Taylor Swift: The Eras Tour. So you were basically there. You were basically there.
I just lacked the confidence and the conviction.
I just want to say, I go to the movies way more than it's healthy, and I still can't get over how much Barbie drove traffic, and particularly like teenager traffic. So this huge demographic came to the movies mostly in August that is not usually around the theater. And so I think it's a great thing to bring them back to the theater. And, we should be seeing Dune next week. Sorry, I'm not going to time machine in this time to say we should be seeing Dune next week. And so without that blockbuster, it's looking like the Marvels is going to be a little soft. Just that I have high hopes. I love Captain Marvel, but it doesn't look like it's driving. It's not righting the Marvel ship. Let's call it that. And so I think this is a really good way to keep the doors open, sell a whole lot of popcorn, and fuel us, like PT said, till the big Christmas release of Aquaman 2, even Aqua really drives back theaters and saves us all.
And also, the fact that the Eras Tour movie is apparently 2 hours and 48 minutes means that all these new cinema goers will be nice and primed for the 3.5 hours of Killers of the Flower Moon that they'll be going to the week after they see this.
And Napoleon.
and for the 4-hour Napoleon cut that will be on Apple TV Plus.
Well, they can get up and get snacks during that. You can pause that.
Sure.
But I mean, yeah, it's a whole other thing to be in the theater. I actually overheard. Oh, who was it? What was it? I think somebody probably on Little Gold Men, or no, it was Variety. Someone on that podcast was saying, "What's the extra half hour? Like Oppenheimer was 3 hours. Why are we complaining about that?" It was really funny. But the other thing, I think it was Matt Bellany on The Town was saying from a box office perspective and a business perspective that like this sort of confirms what we already knew, that movies now that make a lot of money aren't necessarily a certain type of movie, but it's a movie that's an event, right? That somehow is in the ether, is sort of like a thing you got to go to. So, and whether that was Barbenheimer or this, it's like those are two I think Barbie movie, and even if the same demographics are interested in them, Barbie movie and Taylor Swift movie, I feel like are very different things, just intrinsically. And so that's really interesting to think that it doesn't actually matter what the content is; it's more the attitude towards the content as an event.
It's similar to what has shifted in TV ratings, where the live TV things are sporting events, maybe a major political debate or State of the Union speech, to maybe a shrinking degree the Academy Awards, but those are the drivers, and even like a 60 Minutes where it's like, well, this is news that's happening now. I'm not going to go and watch this in 5 or 6 days. I'm not going to build up to binge my 60 Minutes episodes. So yeah, that there's something about like this has to be done now. Is what drives TV. This has to be done together in a theater. Seems to be what's driving movie theater attendance.
All right.
So I play a personal game every year where I try to see as far down the top grossing movies of the year as I can. I think I've seen the top 19 at the moment, although I put an asterisk on Sound of Freedom. You cheat, I cheat, so I don't see Sound of Freedom. So I am pretty positive that despite bearing her no ill will, and also never having heard a single one of her songs, I will be going to see the Taylor Swift movie, and I will report back on how that goes. But my question related to that is, any estimates? How high do you think it's going to go into the top grossing films of the year? We have Barbie at the top now. Barbie is the queen, followed by Mario. Do you think it can touch those numbers, or do you think it'll be somewhere kind of, mid single digits, teens? What are you thinking?
I think it gets to the top 10. I'm reasonably confident it will get to the top 10. I will say under Oppenheimer, but I'm not confident about that. Like it might surpass Oppenheimer if people really love it and they go see it multiple times.
The big question will be, will it have legs, right? Because I think a lot of the top grossers, it's not just when it opens, it's huge, but it's like, can it keep rolling throughout a longer period of time? So I think if it's like, everyone who wants to go goes in like 3 weeks, then it's probably not going to break 1 billion. But if it's like people are seeing it through the holiday season, if it's still around, then I think it could. So we'll see. I don't know. Is that us making it official? The long take review bet, I guess. This is our tiny version of the
as far as I heard,
movie wager.
This isn't a limited release at all, right? So it could very well be there. I saw AV Club reported today which songs were in the film, and the ones that are missing, it was guessed that there could be like a Christmas re-release with, 5 more songs. So if they are planning something like that, and, I would never bet against the savviness of Taylor Swift and her business people, then I think we could be looking at this film long into January at least, because there's not a lot of competition coming. So,
right. I'm gonna be taking my mom. She's been a Taylor Swift fan before it was cool, and so I'm gonna go take her. I'm pretty like Taylor Swift neutral. Like I'll listen if you start playing Taylor Swift, I won't complain. But I'm not like, I didn't try to go see the concert. I wasn't like clamoring for tickets. for that or anything like that. So we'll see. Yeah.
All the reports were that the concert is absolutely incredible. So if it does a good job of capturing that, yeah, it's going to be a good time. Even if you are neutral, neutral to very positive on Taylor Swift. I am curious to hear if Greg ends up leaving saying, yes, I legitimately had never heard any of those songs. Because I always think, I don't really know Taylor Swift songs. And then someone will be like, what about this, and this? And I'll be like, oh, yeah, that wasn't a commercial, or that wasn't a meme, or I did, get a snippet of that in something. So, it'll be interesting to see whether, will this be the next big concert movie that everyone's excited about.
Mm-hmm. As long as Greg doesn't repeat the scuttlebutt incident, we're good, I think.
I was gonna go with the dean from Community saying, like, I hope this doesn't awaken anything in me, and I'll just come out as a full Swiftie with 10.
You get friendship bracelets up your arm,
on each arm, all over. Just I'll somehow have grown bangs while I'm in there. Maybe it'll happen. So.
Every
nickname, Taylor Swift though.
Every Zencastr nickname screen thing will be Greg's version in parentheses at the
end. Cannot wait. Okay, so I think we're ready to talk about something very different. Short films by Wes Anderson. It's quite a pivot. So let's start with the short take. So what was your general reaction to this set of short films? And anything you want to throw in about the way in which you watch them or experience them? Because I do think there is a little bit of variation potentially here, and that might impact how you perceive them.
I'll start by saying I think they're a delight. I thought they were wonderful. I had a really good time with them. I didn't get to enjoy and experience the sort of rollout of them, which was, there had been sort of on the calendar, sort of pegged that and now I have to make sure I have the Wonderful Story. I always think of it as Wonderful World, but it's The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar was going to be on Netflix. It was going to come out by Wes Anderson, and then it's shifted to this. It's a series of short films from different stories, and they came out one per day for 4 days in a row, and just out of calendar reasons, through no ill will towards the project, I didn't get to watch it until they were all out. And so against Jen's explicit recommendation, I just watched all of them I took a break between a couple of them just to do something else, but I did watch them all within like 1 3-hour window. But it didn't seem like a problem to me. I liked the way they felt interconnected. We could discuss. It seems to me like this was initially designed to be a single sort of theatrical release of 1 hour and 45 minutes with these stories kind of existing in order. But I liked that they were separate, and it was a very effective use of the kind of theatrical artifice that Wes Anderson has really liked, going certainly all the way back to Rushmore, but was even more, maybe even more prominent in Asteroid City. And I thought that this presentation of this is how Wes Anderson, using his craft, tells you some bedtime stories from Roald Dahl was, again, a delight, a pleasant delight.
I absolutely loved these. These are so far up my alley. You can't even see the street from where we are sitting with these. And I did the full rollout, and PT recounted it exactly right. And I remember around Asteroid City, there was just like this rumor, like, and there's another one coming. I already finished another film. And it was like, what? Like a second Wes Anderson movie this year? Like, my dreams cannot possibly come true. And then when it turned into 4 more, I was like, what is happening? I was full blown, the Swiftie equivalent of Wes Anderson, a Westie. And a Wessie? Wessie. You don't want to put a T in it. Wessie. And so I could not have been more excited. I think listeners will recall, if they listen to our rankings, I'm not super high on Fantastic Mr. Fox. I often feel like I've missed on that one, that people get something from it that I don't get for some reason. But I thought this was a perfect marriage of material and artist, and the way he put it together just was wonderful. There's a really good New York Times profile on him where they I believe it was in there, they disclosed that the Roald Dahl estate had essentially shown him all these other stories, and Wes Anderson marked these ones like a long time ago, like, oh, I want to do something with those, but he hadn't been able to crack it and figure out exactly what he would do. And I was every morning logging in and finding the new short. And I do want to talk a little bit about how weird it was that they were actually kind of hard to find on Netflix. The first one, when I logged in, was recommended. So the day it came out, I think I saw on Letterboxd it had started on its way up the rankings. And so I found the thumbnail for the wonderful story of Henry Sugar very quickly. But then on the second day, it didn't recommend the Swan to me. It didn't know, if you searched Wes Anderson, a bunch of not Wes Anderson movies come up first. It's like, you must like Owen Wilson. Here's some Owen Wilson. Here's Yumi and Dupree. That must be what you want. And you're like, no. And then the third day, I'm like, I don't know what the third one's called. I haven't paid enough attention until I kind of, again, used Letterboxd to figure out what it was. And then I was like, oh, okay, got it. I found it there. So very interesting to me that they weren't packaged in one title card as the Roald Dahl films or Wes Anderson's Roald Dahl films, that you still have to navigate to each separately. But I loved everything about these. Ralph Fiennes is one of my favorite Wes Anderson actors, and to have him back was such a gift. And I was not expecting how good, but should have, how good Dev Patel and Richard Ayoade and Sir Ben Kingsley all were just incredible. So I will be the gushing fanboy for most of tonight's episode. I have very little to critique about these because I think they're really fun. What about you, Jen?
I'm with you. I think they were really enjoyable, and I would say my favorite aspect of it was how much it made me think about literary storytelling and fictional narrative versus cinematic storytelling, and just how it really kind of clicked something in my brain where I was kind of like, oh, what is it? How is it different to try to translate or not just adapt a short story to a film, but just the modes that you're in each of those mediums. I think for me, that was kind of the most enjoyable thing. Plus the stories themselves are really gripping. And I think having only really read Roald Dahl's, what's considered his children's fiction, I feel like I was not prepared for these stories in terms of just the type of content. So I think you mentioned Fantastic Mr. Fox, and I think we're slipping now naturally into the recommendation algorithm, but there are definitely visual elements of this that I would associate with Fantastic Mr. Fox, but in terms of the tone and kind of the type of story, I feel like they're very different. And we'll talk about it, but I can see the through line. I recognize them as by Roald Dahl, but not necessarily Fantastic Mr. Fox or James and the Giant Peach or all those classics that we sort of associate with him. All right. So yeah, as I said, recommendation algorithm. So if people are listening, they haven't checked these out yet. And I do want to circle back, Greg, to your question about the way that they're packaged and presented, because I do think that was weird to me as well, and I want to talk a little bit more later about that. So we'll put a pin in that for now. But for those listening who are wondering whether or not they would want to check these out, because the recommendation algorithm acknowledges that not everything is for everyone. So are we really only saying these are for Wes Anderson superfans, or what other people might enjoy these if they just casually check them out?
I always use my wife, my darling, wonderful, I couldn't live without her wife, as a barometer on such things, because she gave up on a date when I took her to Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. She gave up on Wes Anderson and was bored out of her skull and never has been won over. I convinced her to go see French Dispatch because she loves The New Yorker, and she sees the artistry, she appreciates it, but is not that cool. And I found that she was kind of doing the peeking out the side of her eye at these. I think these work a little bit for people who maybe tire of the Wes Anderson shtick. I think the runtime helps, that you're only checking in for a brief moment unless you sit down and do them all in a row. So I think that helps. And I don't know. I listened to some podcasters today that were like, I hate Wes Anderson and I hate him even more now. But a bunch of them, I thought, were saying things along the lines of the kind of annoying parts of him just kind of work in this format. And for whatever reason, I think because, they're so small, you don't get overwhelmed, and you can see the kind of the theatricality on the surface, and it all works when there's like no pretending there's a real life version in this, right? So it's kind of like if you saw Asteroid City and you hated all the parts that were actually out in the desert but liked the other bits, then this is for you. But I think people seem to be in or out on Wes Anderson at this point, and only I would say if you're kind of wavering, you like some, you don't like others, will these probably win you back over, in my opinion.
That's very much in line with what my answer was going to be, which is I think it's sort of the anti-recommendation algorithm is if you are really, really anti-Wes Anderson and you do not like him and just he grinds your gears with the way he does stuff. There's nothing in here that isn't that. And maybe, as Greg is saying, the bite-sized component to it, the fact that there is, the way it's inherently structured, I think to add to Jen's point earlier about how it's an interesting sort of rumination or melding of the literary storytelling and cinematic storytelling, but also has that theatrical storytelling in between. Of this is, it's a film of what looks like a theater production of a story very faithfully performed. But if that sounds just like, oh my God, that sounds awful. I can't believe Wes Anderson's doing stuff like that. I don't know if you're going to like it, but I also don't know if there are that many people that are so against it. And I think, even if you are you're like, I kind of like Wes Anderson, but I'm a little strung out. I'm a little worn down. I think the idea of what if the Max Fisher Players did a bunch of Roald Dahl stories is something that might get them interested and say, like, you're never going to commit more than 35 minutes to watching it. If you don't like it, then it's, at most one episode of a sitcom, one kind of extended episode of a sitcom, and you're out. And if you like it, there's a couple more even shorter bits that you could watch. So I think anyone listening should give it a try, unless they really, really don't like Wes Anderson to such a degree that I can't imagine you have gotten this far. You would have gotten past our glowing praise of the short take to get to this point. You would have been so mad you slammed off the episode.
That's fair. I would also just add that if you are a fan of audiobooks, I feel like this is probably up your alley, because most of the dialogue is sort of literary exposition and sound. Like, if you closed your eyes, not that you should, right? Like, because the visual stuff is spectacular and really fun, but if you closed your eyes, it would basically be very close to the audiobook version of these stories. And so I think, I would say if you read The New Yorker, you're a book nerd, right? Like, you like short story, like the form of the short story appeals to you. I'd say that, and even if you didn't think of yourself as a Wes Anderson person, I feel like there's a lot here, potentially.
How about if you listen to podcasts on 1.5 speed, this is for you, because that's just how fast they're talking. Sorry, go ahead with something real.
They do go fast. I will just note, because I feel like it should be noted, and maybe before we get to the spoiler mode, it's a fact in the room. I also think that there are people who understandably are like, I'm out on Roald Dahl. He has a history with anti-Semitic comments that are not okay. And it's one of those things where you're like, oh, like, was it really that bad? Then you look and you're like, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was. It was that bad. It did it. He kept going, and it wasn't great. So I do understand. Like, I have people in my life who are contemporary peers who have children who are like, I loved him and I loved his stories, and I'll never read them to my kids because of these these details that not necessarily just came out, but people weren't really aware of until I think it became a bigger deal when Netflix bought the rights to the stories and announced, like, Wes Anderson's going to do one, and we're going to do a version of the Matilda musical and blah, blah, blah. And people were like, what about this stuff? And there was a sort of a Roald Dahl's family says they're real sorry about all those things he said about Jewish people back in the 80s. Like, they don't think he meant it. He thought he might've just been joshing, which, is up to everyone how much or how little that should affect their ability to enjoy these productions. But I have absolutely no problem with folks that are like, no, that's enough. I'm out. I can't do that.
Do you feel like these shorts engage with the figure that discourse at all, or acknowledge it, or show an awareness of it?
I will say no, except that there is, to keep it vague, there is an element of one story that is like a character kind of in a frustration going to a place of prejudice in a heated moment that seems like, I haven't read it, but seems like it's in the original story. That's not like it's been added in or altering what's going on. Though I do wonder if the very end note of that story is a little bit different than the actual like written version. But beyond that, I don't think so. But I'm willing, when we get into spoiler mode, maybe to be shown where it is, because that would be interesting if it was in there, or if it was just kind of a, that is unfortunate, let's just deal with the text death of the author, and let's deal with these pleasant stories, or pleasant's not the right word, but these enjoyable stories.
All right, I think we're ready to go to spoiler mode, because I was about to say something and I'm like, maybe that's a spoiler. So I think that's usually a sign that we're ready. So if you've not seen these 4 short films and you are now interested, right? Go watch them, pause, go watch them, come back, rejoin us. But yeah, after this, there'll be spoilers galore. Spoilers. So sorry, I'm just trying it out, because we had talked about adding the word spoilers to that.
Spoiler alert.
But the spoiler I was actually going to say, and we'll randomly start here. It's not really a good place to start, but because I was about to say it before we went into spoiler mode, the death of the author in films that literally resurrect the author through an actor's performance.
Yes, the author is a genial seeming character in a weird little shed. But sure, yeah.
And that might have been a spoiler, because I feel like I didn't necessarily realize that Roald Dahl was going, but though I'm not surprised at all. But I was like, when Ray Fiennes is sitting in the chair with his cable knit sweater, which I'm like, oh, Greg's loving this. That I was like, oh, he's actually in this. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. This is Wes Anderson. Of course, he would build in a layer and make that part of the story. So what's a good segue from that? I guess, what do we think? Because like a lot of Wes Anderson material, this has the multiple frames, right? And there's Roald Dahl telling the story, and then even within the story, there's, especially in Henry Sugar, like there's stories within stories. Do we feel like it has a specific purpose here, or in general, if you want to take it in a different direction, like what are these shorts actually telling us, if anything?
I think the first one in particular, so Henry Sugar has a frame narrative built very clearly into it. So I think I could see why Wes Anderson would be attracted to that one. And it kind of made sense. And I would almost treat that separately from the others, because it's so deliberate in setting up, here's Roald Dahl in his writing shed. And it was, as soon as I saw that opening, I was like, there's no way this isn't like a meticulous recreation. And as soon as you Google pictures of that writing shed, it's like the things on the desk are exactly right. The weird little like cardboard thing he puts on his lap, the space here, like it's all exactly there. Like I don't think they were in the museum, but they could have been in the museum, because I believe the writer's shed is a museum piece now. And then the way it goes to Henry Sugar, and then there's a frame narrative about the kind of Ben Kingsley, Dev Patel piece of the story, like it. And then within that, Ben Kingsley tells a story about his history within that. All of that, I think, was much clearer than it was in Asteroid City or even in French Dispatch, because it was the kind of nesting narrative we're all used to. I think if you hated Asteroid City, it's because you jumped back out of that so often, that it, you'd have the little interludes where we jump back and be with the actors again, on a train talking in the middle of this story. And then it even broke it a few times, which I want to talk about that too, because I think they break it here on purpose. And I'm like, why do you do this? Because it's so deliberate. So I think with that, it worked really, really well. And I think, again, that's the piece where I think, as I said in the algorithm, if you really hated Asteroid City, I think because it's much more straightforward, it'll make sense here. The little interludes in the other ones, I think, are much more just like, Roald Dahl pops in and does a thing and then pops back out. So they're even less obtrusive than it is in the first one.
And I feel like those pop-ins in the three shorter shorts are why it makes a lot of sense that these were constructed to all be presented together, because I feel like if you were just like, oh, I've always liked the story, The Swan, I'm gonna watch this, and then suddenly like 3/4 of the way through there's like 1 10-second bit where Ray Fiennes is there and is talking to you, you're just like, what is happening, like what's going on? So I think that setup of the nesting narratives and the storytelling, which, you know, to me screamed Grand Budapest the most, because it was like, you know, we kept nesting in, and I think that Grand Budapest was the sort of clearest about all of that, and that it's the ways in which the French Dispatch and Asteroid City have messed with it were in sort of intentionally trying to erase some lines, potentially at the cost of losing viewers that are just like, what is even going on? But I think that, you know, the nesting is so clear in this, which is partly, I think, to deal with the space issue of there's only so much time in a short film, and because it's so clear in the outside text that is being adapted that was already there. I think that it is setting it up for the viewers to be able to follow it. I don't really know if it's making to go back, I guess, to is this saying something about Roald Dahl or maybe about the controversies around him? Like, I don't think that it is. I actually wasn't 100% certain when I started watching it, because I'm not familiar with the story. I was like, oh, maybe the story begins with an author writing it. And especially because it gets more and more nested. It was really only when we got to the other short stories that I was like, oh, that's clearly supposed to just be him. And then, like Greg, realized, oh, this is an actual space. That space heater clicking on at random times with the little orange light is you know, based on the reality of the author and not just a fun little detail Wes Anderson came up with on his own.
So yeah, the question of, are these intended to be watched in a particular order, I think is really interesting, because to me, Henry Sugar, not only it's the longest one, we'll talk later about if it's we'll debate whether it's the best one, but it is the longest, and I think it's the one that people kind of gravitate towards, at least in terms of critics that I've listened to. But I feel like in it is sort of the thesis of the whole project, where it's like, because the frame narrative is all about, and I've recorded this exactly as this other person told me, right? There's something about like verisimilitude and accuracy, and like sort of like in almost like a journalistic way of like, because I think it was like the Dev Patel's character was ZZ Chatterjee. I feel like it's like should be in the Hall of Fame of Wes Anderson names. It was just great. I'm like, ZZ, that's perfect. But he says something like, you know, because I learned the form of shorthand when I was in medical school, I was able to get down exactly every single word he told me, right? And I feel like there's references like that kind of sprinkled throughout, at least more in the Henry Sugar one than in other ones. But I feel like there's something in that, in terms of his whole project of like, oh, I'm going to capture Roald Dahl's writing HUD exactly as it was, and then we get all these notes about like what was accurate, not accurate, and then there's a moment in Henry Sugar where he's like, well, if I were writing this to be more literary, right, I would have this ending, but this is the ending that actually happened, which I don't know, I want your opinion. Doesn't actually seem that much more like authentic, even if it is what actually happened. It still seems very, very story-like to me. So it's one of those like, it's too crazy to be true sort of things. What maybe is the point. But yeah, anyway, that was a lot of rambling. But I feel like there's something, the capturing things exactly as they were is a part of the project,
which I think it interacts in a very interesting way with all the sort of stagecraft elements to it, where there is like a stagehand that is very like present in all of the scenes, setting up props, like looking into the camera as they're sort of handing over something that the character is going to need. Like they say, oh, you know, I go to the other room to get something, but instead, you know, the stagehand comes in and hands it to them, or, you know, moves around.
Or they hand something back when they're like, get rid of this.
Yeah, they're interacting with them. So there's, you know, that also has this sort of, well, this is all fake because this is not, you know, we're not in any sort of verite presentation of it. So we're back in that kind of Brechtian mode of we're tearing down the illusion of the you know, calling out the artifice to get rid of the illusion that the artifice is real. but it also is sort of like, well, this is how it actually happens. Is, like, no, I don't, like, I, the performer, don't go to some other room and do it. A person who works in the theater comes over and hands it to me, and then they go and close the door. Like, that's the real deal. And so that, in a way, almost makes it feel like these stories are being told even more accurately, even though everything's made up. Like, none of these are actually nonfiction stories. These are all fictional short stories. But yeah, so it's like, in a way, almost removing the artifice is, in one way, is building up the artifice in another.
My read on Asteroid City, because I just want to talk about that old movie. After we reviewed it, I went and saw the props. Our listeners should know I was in the phone booth. I held a bunch of crap. Anyway, but when I read Asteroid City, I interpreted a lot of that. And at some point on text, PT said, this film is either brilliant or completely insane. And I still haven't made up my mind, which is true. If it really had something deep in it. But I interpreted Asteroid City to be that there is a kind of philosophical truth, and all layers of that film are trying to help its characters understand what a truth is. And it's impossible to get to the truth because the artifice is always in the way. You can never completely get rid of the artifice to be pure verisimilitude. And that, to me, is why there's a really weird moment in Asteroid City where all of a sudden Bryan Cranston is in the innermost. He travels from the outermost shell to the innermost and says, like, am I not in this scene? And Scarlett Johansson's like, no, like, get out of here. And it's like so bizarre. And it's like, why did, and there are moments like that here where they get handed the wrong prop and they kind of fuddle with it. And they like show that they are not actually getting there. And then you think about how meticulous Wes Anderson is in his planning. And it's like, you're planning the fake aspects of the artifice, and it's like you're signaling what it is. So I think, Jen, that was my way of saying I think it's the same thing here, except it's less a like philosophical truth, and it is all about like the record. And so I will keep a mystery about what my rankings are. But in the Swan, for instance, if you wanted to talk about the Swan, there is a moment where Rupert Friend, as the narrator, reveals that the little boy character is him, and he's standing over the tracks, and he says, these tracks right here, I'm here. And it's like fake, because you've just been walking through the set and you've been seeing the wheat pop open indoors, but it's like very important to that narrator to say, this right here is truth within this. And then later, when it's the bit about the swan, the titular swan, it's about witnesses who saw the swan. So we need to correct the record as part of that. And then to throw in the Ratcatcher, Richard Ayoade is playing a newspaper man, and that features prominently that he's sitting at his newspaper desk, and so it's again that kind of journalistic impulse that was also in the first one, like you noted. And so I do think there's really something to that it's fun for Wes Anderson to play with the fact that all of us are seeking truth of one kind or another, and we're all going to fail to find that in some kind of meaningful way. And I think that's really a weird thing for a guy this deep in his career to be seemingly kind of obsessed about. Because it does, I think, it could be that all his work is a lie, right? Like it could be like a midlife crisis. I don't know.
But if we're gonna put it in the broader cultural context, it could be a reaction to postmodernism. And I did not think that until I heard you talking about it in that way, and the idea of like we're searching for truth and we can't find it, because postmodernism's big thing is like it's a nihilistic approach to truth, where it's just like there's no point, everything is faulty and flawed, and in particular memory. And I feel like the impulse to be like, no, we can record things, we can make things concrete, even if it doesn't capture exactly what we wanted to, we can do that. And sort of it's almost like a regaining of control over the sort of the what's the word I'm looking for, it's not faultiness of memory, but like the unreliability of memory. Right. Because and the Rupert Friend moment, I think, is a really good example of that, because he's like, no, I'm an adult telling this story about when I was a child. And postmodernism would say that you couldn't trust anything I said about that, right? But because I'm here with these train tracks, like I'm somehow regaining control over that idea, right? So that's super interesting. And that actually, could Wes Anderson be starting like the next, literary cultural movement that has yet to be named? That's is what comes after postmodernism.
It's postmodernism until it's anti whatever the thing is that comes after postmodernism. Right.
Okay, so it's whatever's after that. Yeah. Is this?
I also think there's a on a more, not to say that this stuff isn't functional, because I think this is really important, and it's really good insight to sort of think about how it is about truth and about what is actually real and what can be recorded and what can be trusted. But I also think there's a function in the story of, here's this little kid that's been in peril. I'm about to put him in intense peril,
right.
But I'm going to let you know, because I'm an adult. I'm the adult version of him. He's not really going to be murdered by this train. So don't actually be so stressed when we do this next little segment. Like, it's still this, the tone's the same. Don't think we're pivoting to like an actual like horror story. So I think
it also gives away that he survives, which is huge. Right. Normal, like I don't want to use the word normal, but like what I would expect from a short story that seems very intense and suspenseful like this is that we don't know until the end whether or not the little boy survives. And that just sort of punctures and deflates that idea altogether. Because it's like, oh, he's an adult. He clearly survives whatever horrors he's going through. Even though for a second at the end, I thought that I'm like, did he die? Is he dead? Is the Swan dead and he's dead, or did he? And then I was like, no, Roald Dahl told us that he's like one of those people who survives no matter what. So like, okay, I'm like, okay, because the imagery was very like, I think he's dead. I had to remember what Roald Dahl told me.
The twist is it's a Sunset Boulevard riff. Like, he's actually just been the dead body narrating it the whole time.
Well, and to that mix, I just want to add the title cards at the end. So each of the four then remind you again, almost in a historicity way of like, and here is where Roald Dahl was in his life when he wrote this story. And I think it's the Rupert Friend, the Swan character. They're like, and it was named after his RAF buddy to help him live on, who was killed at the Battle of Athens. I think it's that one. It's one of the four.
Yeah.
And so it's like,
I think so.
Oh, so then your stories become a way to memorialize something also from your actual life and record a truth in that way. This was my buddy who died. This was a newspaper story I read. And I believe the rat catcher had said, he went to a village and was just inspired by all the kind of cool, quirky village people, not like the village people, but the villagers who live in the village. And the rat catcher was like one of many that was gonna, like, what a great idea for a short story collection. Like, here's all the denizens. So that adds again like this other really weird level of like, I will show you the ways in which cultural knowledge is constructed and the flaws in each of them. But maybe the flaws don't matter because the truth can be that, Rupert Friend lives and we love him and so on, right? Like, the emotion can outweigh the actual record.
We've knocked out several questions I think I had in this Google Doc. But actually, maybe it's now time because we've checked the postmodernism box. And once PT said postmodernism, I'm like, oh, right, because we used to make jokes in grad school about Popomo and how that sounded really funny. It all came flooding back. But I assume it's Greg, because it's referencing another Wes Anderson film, put a note in our Google Doc about, is this a response or is this kind of dealing with Darjeeling Limited? And so I assume that's us talking about imperialism and the West and the East and India, but that might be me reading into it.
No, let me dive in and why I added that question. So that was me, established, Jen, sniffed out. And I actually am stealing this thought a little bit from David Chen over at the /Filmcast. Sorry, nope, the Filmcast. I forgot they dropped the / and never looked back.
Yeah, what's the deal with that sidebar?
They used to be affiliated with the website /Film, but then they became independent.
Oh, but they're not. Yeah. So that explains.
So they're not. Okay. They're no longer with that website, although they're still very friendly. It wasn't like a bad falling out. I think it was just
that always confused me because I'm like, why does this have two names? And is this the same /Film, or is it like, I assumed it actually was the opposite, where it was like they both happened to come up with the same name and then it became awkward. So that makes more sense what you're saying. Carry on.
Well, And so I will say, I am not somebody who wants to pretend to understand the ways in which Darjeeling Limited may or may not do harm to people of the Indian culture, which I think there is an exoticism that film expresses about India and its Indian people that I think is kind of hard to grapple with. Now, I will give my middle-aged white New Englander view on it, which is the three central characters in that film are complete a-holes, and you should not trust anything they say. Like, the whole point is that they go to India expecting the weird Orientalist version of India that they had dreamed of, and they don't find it, and that's upsetting. But I do think a lot of people suggest that film too much endorses that side of things, right? That it feels like the actual Indian people in the film Darjeeling Limited are stock tropes, kind of mystics and spiritual gurus and so on. So I find it really interesting then that we have two stories in the four that focus on India, Indian subplots at least, or the full plot, and this way in which there's kind of a British colonial lens on it is different. Now, if we were to take Henry Sugar first, I think there is a bit of a stereotypical guru at the center of it that I think you could say kind of fits into the negative kind of stereotypes. However, the ways in which the nasty person is actually enlightened by Eastern philosophy seems not mysticized to me, that it's like, oh, wow, I wanted to get rich and actually discovered enlightenment in a meaningful way, seems to kind of work against that. And then I think PT was alluding to this moment earlier. There is within the plot of Poison, there is a, white British man played by Benedict Cumberbatch in that one, who is incredibly nasty to an Indian doctor played by Sir Ben Kingsley. And the end ends up being a bit of kind of racist bigotry from Benedict Cumberbatch's character to Sir Ben Kingsley's character. And Dev Patel, as the mediator, goes and apologizes to the doctor. And the doctor gets this great line of like, it's not up to you to apologize, and storms off into the night. And so it felt to me like there was kind of comeuppance being shown of like, hey, do I think this can undo years of British colonialism? No, I do not. But it felt to me that maybe Wes Anderson was like, when I dabbled in this before, I hadn't done enough to kind of break away from harmful cultural representation. So I don't know if I ascribe to this yet, but I was just kind of wondering, do we think there's a little bit of work here to undo the damage Darjeeling Limited might have done?
I mean, it's so persuasive the way that you lay it out that I kind of feel like I need to say yes.
Like, yes.
To echo all the times that Greg was saying, oh, like PT said something smart. Greg said something smart, and I just have to agree with it.
Yeah, I think the way that it's handled is a lot better than Darjeeling Limited, or like just the framing of India as a place and Indian people, and you're right. It comes down to that one exchange between Ben Kingsley's character and Dev Patel's character. That's the thing that to me pushes it further, where it's like, oh, we're not just in this environment and this culture, like we're dealing with like it's the difference between telling a story that includes a moment of racism and calling it out also. And I feel like it's pretty subtle, all things said and done, but I think the fact that line, if you take that scene out, then I don't think it's as good. It's not, because to me, when I was watching it, after Benedict Cumberbatch's character has that moment of rage, I was like, oh, that's oh, I want to like, and then I was like, are they just not going to say anything about this? And so I feel like if we didn't have that scene afterwards, I would just have been left hanging to be like, this film is not telling me how I should think or feel about this, which is not okay, right? Or just is too open. So that's sort of my thought about it. And then it made me realize, well, is Roald Dahl, because I had, I don't really know that much about Roald Dahl other than sort of the public discourse about him as a figure. But I was like, oh, is he kind of like a Rudyard Kipling kind of figure where a lot of his literature sort of dip into the to post-colonial or to colonial British stories, like, or what did he was he a British soldier in India or something like that, like to the point where that's why he wrote these stories. So that it kind of got my mind reeling about like rethinking Roald Dahl as an author. And I haven't answered any of those questions. Like I haven't done any research to try to clear that up. But yeah,
well,
so yeah.
And
Yeah,
to put that in conversation with what PT brought up at the beginning of the episode, if he is, rightfully being charged with a lot of anti-Semitism, maybe this isn't a figure that we should allow to get cleaned up, right? Like, are we in like Green Book territory or some such? No, perish the thought. But the idea being that, obviously real authors are, complicated figures just like the rest of us. And he could very well be anti-Semitic and yet say some nice progressive things to kind of outpace British colonialism. And I completely agree that it makes me want to do research on the man Roald Dahl, because this, like yourself, I only knew the children's literature. So when this even just cracked open, like, oh, he's got other stuff to study, I was excited by that. And the weird thing about The Wonderful World of Henry Sugar coming out first is it sounds like whimsical, and it's going to be like Fantastic Mr. Fox, and it's going to be, and so I was very surprised about halfway through. I'm like, oh, this isn't getting whimsical. Like this is something else, and this is a different register that I haven't heard Roald Dahl in. But I do think if you then paste this all up to I'm a nice old man who lives in my shed and has progressive values you should admire, that's problematic if it's erasing kind of other complexities. And, I think anytime actual figure gets translated into fictional character or character in a film, it's difficult to find that line. And if it inspires people to go looking at it, that feels good to me, but maybe that's not enough.
I also wondered if Wes Anderson added that scene. You know what I mean? Like how, because the part of me was like, when Benedict Cumberbatch is delivering those lines and you're like, oh no, like it's going to this other place. Then I suddenly was like, is that Roald Dahl speaking through that character? That's what I assumed originally. And then we get the second scene and I was like, oh, now I'm confused. So it would be really interesting to try to pinpoint how much Wes Anderson changed the story if he did. It's like, based on what we see here, it sounds like that he wouldn't. But with something like that, and considering the context of the discourse surrounding Darjeeling Limited, I'd be really curious to find out if that was him being like, look, like I'm adding another layer through which we can view this, so it's not just Roald Dahl expressing racist views through one of his characters, right?
Well, I did look up the text of the original story.
Oh, you did?
So I didn't do the research that you are all saying about Roald Dahl and his history. The only connection I have with all of that of like, is he maybe secretly like, progressive in some ways, is I know one of the other, when people are like, he has these, he had these anti-Semitic quotes in the 80s as a public figure, that the sort of add on to that is there's some descriptions of characters that are Jewish that are questionable in some of his work. And the way the Oompa Loompas are described in the book, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, they're African pygmies who were enslaved by Willy Wonka, but they're happy, so it's fine. And so it's a little bit like, okay, like there's some questionable colonial elements here. So just to say, and I'm going to read this, not the whole thing, but just like, here's how the story actually ends. There is that moment of Harry is starting. There's not a lot of, I feel like there was a little more, maybe I won't get, but like he starts sort of throwing some, your dirty little Hindu sewer rat, and starts throwing some color things. The narrator says like, Harry, shut up. It was terrible. The things he was saying. Then it's the doctor leaves, but the exchange of dialogue is, don't you listen to Harry, I said. This thing's made him so he doesn't know what he's saying. And then they go out, they walk outside, presumably in silence. And then the narrator says, you did a wonderful job. Thank you so much for coming in. All he needs is a good holiday, he said quietly without looking at me. Then he started the engine and drove off. So that's all that's in the story. So that like little bit from Sir Ben that I think was like felt very like, oh, that is poignant. There is something there. And just like it felt so small and subtle that it didn't feel like an imposition, but that is an addition to
That
the story.
100% supports what Greg was saying.
Yes.
About this is a
listeners should know I had walked away from the camera while that was read, and alone away from my microphone, I went, oh, like, oh, there it is. So yes, absolutely. So I think, and I respect Wes Anderson for that, because I'm a fanboy, but also because, like, you know, I think he is thoughtful about the discourse around him. You know, the jokes this summer were that he's seen your memes and he's not impressed. And I think he is aware of the kind of purchase his figure has, his work has. So that's really encouraging to me. And, you know, then it becomes a question about, in light of the anti-Semitism, that maybe Roald Dahl doesn't deserve that. And that's really curious as because these films ask about the question of a historical record and truth, then all of this, I think, that we've been discussing is in play, and it makes it really fascinating and hard set of questions. So well done. Good research, PT.
Hey, thanks, man. I will note I didn't look up the text of the other stories because I wasn't as interested, because
right.
I didn't have that same question.
Yeah.
So maybe there are other little alterations along the way that, you know, were also significant, maybe not in that kind of reclamation of something or trying to improve the impact in a different era. But I also think, and again, this is maybe biased from my perspective of, I did do the thing of I sat down and watched all of them together, where I was kind of feeling like these make the most sense together. And it opens with the longer story, which, from my thinking, my experience, or at least maybe my default assumption about short story collections, is I would think the like one that feels like the novella would come last. That usually it's like short stories, and then the longer one would be at the end. But this, you know, very clearly has it first. I think that's needed to sort of set up the nesting structure, set up the author within the story. But I also think it bookends well, like, because, as Greg was saying, it is this sort of, I find this report of a doctor in a faraway land, and he found, you know, a person from an even further away land that had this mystical ability, and blah blah blah, and the sort of that kind of you know, colonial Orientalism concept of all of that is framed nicely with this being the end note of the whole project of, you know, this sort of thing of, you know, it's, you know, that little insight that is added in, you know, and again, might be one of the few things that is created whole cloth for this, is putting that in. I think that kind of is a nice bookend to this whole experience of, kind of like, I know, like, that's kind of a crafted reality that British people had in the mid 20th century, that this is what the world was like, in the same way that these stories are all crafted, in the same way that this stagecraft is all crafted, in the same way that maybe what we consider true and truth is all crafted.
This is now making me think of the French Dispatch, because I mean, the whole series is about these expat writers, right? So then we start to see like a wider interest that Wes Anderson might have in sort of like going to another place in another culture, and sort of like, as a writer or as a storyteller, like, what is the proper way to engage with that creative process, right? And almost like I'm not going to remember, Greg might remember, the ways of reading textbook that we had to use at Northeastern had an anthropologist essay that was about like
Gertz.
roosters.
It was about
Gertz,
cockfighting.
thank you.
Yeah. Good essay.
That it is. And like that whole story, that whole essay is sort of contemplating, is there a way to actually know another culture, right? Like, that's part of it. Can we does documenting and recording it do so, like, you know, like what happens in that process, kind of. And so, I feel like this is interesting addition to Wes Anderson's larger body of work, which I hadn't really thought of before we started talking about it. So,
I was also thinking about the French Dispatch, because technically I'm always thinking about the French Dispatch. And to note in that sense, remember, Wes Anderson himself is an expat now. He lives in France and doesn't come back to America other than for promotion. But within those, all the frames often bring the representation of an authentic experience into another medium before it becomes, or after it becomes, an article. It is it is an experience, then there is an article about it, but then all of the narrators are presenting that article in some third way later, one of which is a museum in the heartland of America that is trying to capture what it's like to be in this French prison, right? So it's like the same, you're absolutely right, the connection's there. And French Dispatch rules.
Although I feel like these shorts, my hot take is that, I think this was in my Letterboxd review, these shorts are proof that French Dispatch probably should have been a series of shorts.
Ooh,
sorry.
Who's to say it wasn't? And you just didn't watch it correctly.
Well, because I think okay. I mean, maybe we can get into that as we share our rankings.
Fair. Before we do the rankings, that was such a good transition. I'm sorry to blow it up, but I do just want to also add, in addition to all this, another sort of just wrinkle is the sort of questions of duality that are in here, where, because this is, in a way, Wes Anderson is like, all these stories are great, I'm presenting you a film version of them, but actually, like, it's a stage version. And that there is this element of, like, I love these Roald Dahl short stories. Maybe Roald Dahl has got some elements in him that's not that great. And I think a lot of that sort of what we're talking about, what the way that these people, the British people of the mid 20th century might have thought about folks in other countries versus the way they actually were and the way that they lived. Like, all of that is underscored and emphasized, especially in Henry Sugar, by all of the actors having at least two roles. And, they come in as someone else, which underscores that sort of high school play thing of, we only have so many actors, so we got to double up on the roles, but also sort of shows the duality of all the people involved, that there's this complexity, that there isn't a singular answer or a singular thing that can be the truth.
Now you segue us into rankings, PT.
Similar to how there's no singular truth, there's no singular ranking of these four short stories, short films. So, however, we're going to try to at least share our own by going, what's the order? We're going to go from 4 to 1, like low to high or high to low?
We'll start at the bottom and work our way up. And then in our Google Doc, just to keep it straight, I put in a turn order so that we won't forget. But yeah. So Greg, you're up first.
Welcome to my world. Yes, I'm going to just say my rankings come down purely to personal enjoyment. While we'll continue to talk a little bit about the Netflix of it all, I do think some of these, for me, lost a little enjoyment because you have to be pretty locked in. And, to add to this debate about the theater versus home, one thing I love about going to the theater is I don't look at my phone ever, because I'm not a terrible human being like so many of my theater-going brethren are. Nothing beats when I saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and the woman next to me literally got her phone out and recorded Leonardo DiCaprio freaking out in the trailer. I'm like, this is unacceptable. You just can't do this. This is not. She didn't listen to me. So purely on my enjoyment of, I was sitting there, and I will say I watched each the day it came out, and then this afternoon I sat down and I bombed through all four together. But I put them in reverse order. So I was trying to see if the order mattered. So originally, just to establish for all of us, the order they came out was Henry Sugar, The Swan, Ratcatcher, Poison. And then this afternoon, I went Poison, Ratcatcher, The Swan, Henry Sugar. So number 4 on my list, with great apologies, I'm going to go Ratcatcher. It felt like the least substantial to me. It was fun. It was perhaps a little more what I expected them all to be, that it was kind of frivolous and silly. But it didn't really work that well for me, relatively, of the 4. Though I will give a special shout out. I hope Ralph Fiennes got offset and called, I want to say it's Timothy Spall. Is that the right actor? Who played the Wormtail in the Harry Potter movies, and was like, yes, you'll never believe what I just had to do. Like, I had to do the same thing you did for 4 movies for a play, for one short film. So not bad by any means, but it just didn't feel like it had any of the additional resonance. And I think it's the only one that featured significant amounts of stop motion, which it was fun to see the kind of play of stop motion again, because I do enjoy that from Life Aquatic forward in the Wes Anderson filmography. But just not my favorite. So I'm going 4th with Ratcatcher.
I mean, ditto. Exactly the same. I have very little to say. Like, it was great. Like, I really liked Ratcatcher. I had a fun time with it. I enjoyed the Ray Fiennes especially really biting into the role, so to speak, and just having a real meal of it. And Richard Ayoade as narrating that one was super fun. But yeah, it's the only one that I left without some sort of like moment or image that I kept coming back to. And it's interesting. I'm glad that you sort of did that reverse order thing, because I was wondering if there was some degree of it just sort of being the lull of these have been unfolding. Again, I took little stops in between, but these have been going for a little over an hour. Like, where am I now? Like, what's happening? But yeah, great. Like, and if they had all been like this, we all would have had a good time. We probably would maybe have shaved 20 minutes off this podcast because we wouldn't have had as much to talk about, but we would have been like, oh, wasn't it fun when this happened? And wasn't it fun when that happened? So, glad it exists. Nothing wrong with that. And, I love the idea of them being called the Rat Man. I want Exterminators to be called Rat Man again.
And Ratter, isn't that don't they use that word? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this is also my number 4. And I would just say my favorite moment in this one is when he's holding the tin, but it's just his fingers making the shape of the tin. And he's like, this tin never gets out of my sight. And you're just like, but there's nothing there. And to me, that was one of the moments where I was like, oh, wow, like this is very poignantly sort of, and this was, to me, was like the most meaningful moment in the whole one. Cause I agree with both of you that like this one had the least thematic material, I think, to chew on. But that moment was like, well, it's literally an empty space that he's holding in front of us, to be like, when you tell a story, you visualize it in your head. It's not about an actual physical object. But when we tell a story on film, there's always a visual like marker, right? And so to take that away from us and have him just like hold his fingers with an empty circle, I thought was really brilliant. And then the other thing too was like, this is the one I fell asleep in the middle of, because I was trying to watch all of them together, and then I think I mentioned that on a previous episode, and I was just really tired. But what if I had just gotten to the part with the animated rat, I probably would have stayed awake through the whole thing, because I fell asleep right before that. So when I went back to rewatch it the other day, I was like, oh, like, but first of all, that rat was way too skinny, which I get is the point, but disturbing. And I when it shifts to Rupert Friend putting the fake teeth in his mouth because he becomes the rat, and then they shoot it like up really close. I was like, this is so campy, and I love it. But I think it kind of jumped the shark a little bit in that moment, in terms of like taking it seriously. But I would say that out of the 4 of them, this one reminded me the most of what I had originally associated with Roald Dahl in terms of types of storytelling. Because I think the ending where he's like, well, all chocolate has rat's blood in it or whatever, right? Or licorice. I was like, oh, that's a very Wonka, the witches, like kind of twisted, scare the children sort of, but be whimsical enough that it's okay. To me, I was like, that was the only one of these that I was like, oh, this is like the Roald Dahl I knew before watching these. So yeah. What's your number 3,
now
Greg?
3 invocations of the name, so we have to pause to play the Wonka trailer. Thanks a lot, Jen. And
oh no,
and we're back. Oh man, somehow Hugh Grant as the Oompa Loompa was even worse than the racist Oompa Loompas. My God,
I'm just glad Timothée Chalamet can be Best Actor back to back. Now that Wonka and Dune are in separate years. Thank God.
Wait, so there was I didn't watch it, but there was a new trailer today, right? Is that what you're referring to?
Oh,
there was.
I don't know.
I don't think he was.
You weren't.
No.
Okay. But PT.
But there was.
I just know
I didn't watch it.
I've seen every movie I've gone to lately that's been attached to it. And I'm like, no, stop everything. No, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know.
All right. I'll keep us on track, though.
I get that it's made by the Paddington 2. This is my last Wonka take. I get that it's made by the Paddington people, but there's something does not feel right about this movie. That's all I'm gonna say.
Deeply upsetting. Like
all right, Greg, what is your
blood
number
in
3?
the licorice, it doesn't feel right.
Right?
Number number 3 for me, and I'm now nervous we're going to be identical, and we've come up with this ranking bit just without telling each other, just to tell each other how smart we are. I'm going to go Poison down here. Now, maybe that would have changed in my mind a little bit after our conversation and PT's revelation, but I will say I liked the tension of Poison, but this is the one that had trouble keeping my attention, and I was reaching for my phone. Now, I imagine if I saw this in the theater, I would have been like sucked in completely and really in it. So it just didn't quite click as well as the two that remained for me, despite really enjoying it and really enjoying that final moment. I will give a shout out to the slow pan down Benedict Cumberbatch ending directly on his crotch, which I was like, Wes, come on, buddy, what's happening here? Which very strange in his filmography again, but it's, hey, we all gotta be Cumber bitches sometimes. So anyway, that's my number 3.
Wow.
I was going to say there's a lot of Facebook groups full of middle-aged ladies that would be very excited to know there's a pan down his body. We might be in trouble, guys. I also have Poison at number 3. For basically, I almost put it up higher because of that last moment, and I felt like that moment was so affecting, and I thought worked so well and hinted at a depth that these shorter ones weren't really engaging with to too much of a degree. But it is only the last like one little bit of like maybe 15 or 20 seconds across this 16 17 minute story, which is very fun. I have had a really good time. Did not know this story at all. Was pretty certain. I was like, well, this is just going to end up there's no snake, right? So I felt real smart that I had outthought Henry in the thing, but I was having a good time with it, and I liked I like this in all of them, but I particularly liked the sort of we go to the kitchen, like we work this thing out, and the sort of the work with the stagehand and the layout of the scenery I thought was particularly fun here. And what a great combination of 3 performers in Dev Patel, Ben Kingsley. Sorry, Sir Ben Kingsley. I respect that Greg really wants the title, the honorific in there. And regular person Benedict Cumberbatch, who is like, that's a great combination of people. I really like this one, and it only speaks to how much I like the other 2 that it's only at number 3.
Well, I do not have this as my number 3, so we're good. We're good.
Ooh.
We're good. So
All
my
right.
number 3, and I feel like this might make some waves, is Swan. And what's interesting is that I feel like when I initially watched these, I thought Swan was going to be my number 1. And that's mostly because Rupert Friend does a funny voice, and it made me really happy.
Multiple, actually.
And like he never changes his facial expression when he changes voices, and that to me was hilarious and very unsettling at the same time. And really, really committed to the idea that these, like, we have to make sure people know that these were written short stories, right? That these were literary works before they were these shorts. And I feel like his commitment to like a straight face as he's sort of switching voices, I think was really important in terms of contributing to that idea. And but on a rewatch, and I can't actually say for certain if I rewatched all of them. Oh no, I did. Well, okay, so if we count when I fell asleep halfway through Ratcatcher, then I've watched all of these twice. but if you don't count that, then I've only watched Ratcatcher once. But it sort of dropped down when I rewatched them because I feel like the suspense was there in terms of like, but until it wasn't, as we talked about earlier. And then it was like, where is this story going? And it's just like escalating and escalating and escalating. But to me, by the end of it, when I watched it the second time, I just wasn't as wowed by it in terms of like, wow, we really went on a journey with this character. I was just sort of like, well, that was awful. And so that's why it dropped down. And I just didn't like, there wasn't as clear as a thematic takeaway from this, whereas in the ones that are my 1 and 2, I can point to very clear things where I'm like, oh, okay, this is the thesis of this film. So yeah. Greg, what's your number 2?
Let's see. I have gone back and forth over and over again on these last two because I do think they're pretty equal in my mind for what I'm saying. But I will, just to be a weirdo, I'm gonna go with Henry Sugar at number 2, and I have immense love for this short. I absolutely love the first 10 minutes when you kind of zip through the frames and the way Rafe Fiennes leaves the shed to go to the outside the mansion, and then the way Benedict Cumberbatch walks towards the camera and the library comes down behind him blew me away. That was the first time I was like, oh my God, like we've got something great here. Like this is incredible. Like I'm so locked into this. And
he just casually crosses his legs.
Yeah.
And sits back and like nothing's happening. It's great.
I really have no complaints about any performer in any of these because they all, I don't know how many takes they did. There were times where I became really glad that it wasn't a oneer, but also was wondering, like, why didn't they just do this as one long take? Because there are some very long takes in these shorts. So I think this one I felt the length of, which it's only like 40 minutes compared to the 17 minutes in the others, and it has a lot in it. But especially on the rewatch, kind of around the 2/3 mark, I'm like, oh, this is still going, huh? Because there's a lot going on. Around the time Benedict Cumberbatch is throwing money, I was like, oh yeah, there's still a lot of this to go.
Is that the Muppet Christmas Carol balcony?
Oh, I don't know.
It looks exactly like it. The one that Scrooge comes out of at the end and is like, I'm changed man. Merry Christmas to you all. I swear it's the same one.
It did have me thinking of Christmas Carol, oh, this is the Scrooge moment. But I didn't connect it. It might be a similar, if not the same set as when Michael Caine is doing. Sorry.
And I also want to shout out why an underspoken moment I love, at least, I mean, I haven't heard anybody talk about this. I actually really love the moment. It's once we enter Dev Patel's piece of the story, ZZ Chatterley, or Chatterjee,
I think it is, but I'm not sure.
There's a shot after they bandage Sir Ben Kingsley, and all of a sudden this like very constructed, everything's on a giant set becomes a real building for a second, right? And they walk through the halls chasing him. And on the rewatch, I'm like, oh, this is like the only thing that's real in any of these, I think, is like we're actually in a hospital because they go down a set of stairs. I'm like, you couldn't have faked this. It's there. So, yeah, no complaints about this at all. I think it's really, really fun. I do like, I think it was also a revelation. Obviously, he's in the Poison, as we just talked about. But I was like, how has Benedict Cumberbatch not been in all Wes Anderson films? And then I was like, how has Dev Patel not been in all Wes Anderson films? Because they're both so good. And that's no disrespect to Richard Ayoade or Sir Ben Kingsley. But it was really great. And I enjoyed this one a lot.
I will agree that I think I ultimately gave the Jeffrey Wright honorary award for Why Are You Not in All Wes Anderson Movies award to Dev Patel, but Benedict Cumberbatch was a very close second. And luckily, the process is redeemed. We will not have the same list. I did put the Swan at number 2. It was tight. Honestly, the 3, I was kind of moving all of them around, but I do love the Swan. It's the one, well, no, because Henry Sugar is my number 1, obviously. I'm sorry to break the mold. But that's the one I probably thought of the most. But the Swan is one that, like, when I initially watched them, and kind of all 3, I was like, okay, and the 3 short ones, like, how are they going to sit? And I, like, let it kind of linger for a while. And the Swan just kept, ironically, like, bubbling up, flying up to the top. And, like, little moments of it were sticking with me. And I really think that if I had to, which luckily I don't, but if I had to pinpoint like what was my favorite performance, it's Rupert Friend in this, just because he has so much to do, and he's just on the run, and like Greg was saying, maybe 1.5 speed, like trying to like rattle through all of this, switching between the voices, and walking to the camera from the camera, the whole like setup of how it looks when the train's flying over. Again, there was this thing in the back of my mind where I'm like, this is the Max Fisher Players. Like, this is like the version of the helicopter landing in their Apocalypse Now is, or Platoon, I forget which movie they're doing, but like, it's like, oh yeah, like this is if Max Fisher was had to do a train running by, they'd set it up this way. But yeah, I mean, I see what Jen is saying, whereas like, ultimately it's kind of like, what was the like takeaway or what was the point? But I think just the inherent like cruelty of humanity and how like there's people who are trying to survive when they're put in a position where folks are being mean to them, and the fact that halfway through this was me, like this was my story, like Rupert Friend, the master performer, presenting this to you, like this is where I ended up and I'm doing great, like everything turned out fine, is the sort of like overarching, like, I don't know, like nice thing that's happening, that's like running underneath it, even though it does sort of look like this kid crashes and dies in his backyard with the swan wings tied to him at the end of the story. But that's okay. I don't mind a nice little dark fable. That is sort of what I would, what I think of Roald Dahl. It's just kind of like, again, the licorice was maybe the most Wonka-ish of it all, but this kind of like, and here's this story.
Play the trailer again. That's 3 again.
Oh, make it happen. The snozberries taste like snozberries, ladies and gentlemen. But the that like, it's this nasty little story of people being mean to each other, and there's like enough hope of perseverance embedded in it, but it's not really like emphasized or part of the text, and it's just like, yeah, this kid did nothing wrong, and he just got the crap beat out of him for the day, and that sucked. Have a good night, everyone. Sleep well.
Is the implication that he actually managed to fly with the swan wings?
Yeah, or
right? Is it like several people reported that they saw a swan flying around town or something like that, and then his mom looks up and he crashes down? So like,
yeah, I mean, magical realism. I don't know, but I think it's supposed to be. Yeah, I mean, I think that you could read it as he sort of just realized he could glide away from where he was, and it's a small town. It doesn't take long to get where he's going. But the sort of, he sees a light, he jumps towards the light, that he is able to do something magical to survive and get out of that scenario, and then look like he died.
Which makes it a really good pairing with Henry Sugar, because that whole thing is like, how can you see without your eyes, right? And that's, everyone in the story reacts to that like it's impossible and it's a miracle, and like, even the scientists and the doctors are just like, how can this possibly be? So it's interesting that there's the role that the fantastical plays in these stories, though we don't get that as much in the other two at all, so it's interesting. Okay, so I have to give my number 2. So my number 2, though this was really tough for me, was Henry Sugar. And actually, I thought I was going to be the cool one that zagged. I was going to try to be the Chris Ryan by not putting Henry Sugar first, because I was like, oh, everyone's going to put Henry Sugar first. So I'm glad we're not just doing that. But I think for me, this is in second place because, not just because it's like the obvious pick for number 1, and I wanted to not do that, but because the sticking point for me is what the ending is trying to say. Because on the one hand, he says that he describes like, and what normally a storyteller would do with this character is describe how he uses his powers to like ironically see his own death, and then he dies, right? But then they keep going, and it's this like, and he was the best person ever, right? And did all these amazing things for the world, and then he sort of dies the same way. And like he knew, like he could see his own death with his abilities, and I was just like, what like, what is that about? And so I was like, and was scratching my head at the end, and then I do think that last section just adds. And maybe I'm exactly the right audience for Wes Anderson. He's like calling me out and making fun of me, because I felt like that last bit was sort of like an unnecessary epilogue almost. And I would rather have ended sort of where he describes the sort of quote unquote perfect literary ending, right? So maybe that says more about this choice, says more about me than it does about the film. And I'm actually the target, and I feel personally attacked. Maybe that's why it's at number 2. But yeah, obviously there's so much. Dev Patel, I think, is my favorite. As much of a fan of Benedict Cumberbatch as I am, Dev Patel he just understood the assignment so perfectly. Where he's like, because he's the one who has to keep being like, I said, he said, constantly, and that has to be exhausting. Like, I don't know what kind of breathing exercises he did before he played this role, but it worked. Yeah, and I feel like also structurally, the way that it, to go back to what we talked about at the beginning, like the way that it sort of linearly kind of does that nesting egg, we move further in and then we move further out. We sort of practice it with the writing hut at the beginning, right? Because it kind of like peels layers away and gets further and further away to create distance, but it's just like the different scenery that's kind of pulling away. And then I think the story itself kind of does that in reverse. And I feel like the end just didn't feel as sort of structurally sound when it's like pulling back out again. Bam. Greg, what's your number 1?
Just because Jen is an extreme podcast professional, I want the listeners to know that in the Google Doc, she filled in PT's number 1 because he revealed it, but left mine and hers blank because we haven't revealed it. And who could possibly know what our number 1s are until we say them out loud? So kudos to Jen for accurate note keeping down to the moment.
Greg's number 1 in a twist is the French Dispatch.
There it is.
Which should have been a series of shorts. I stand by this. Come at me.
Let's see. Quiet up and listen down. Here we go, friends. Here's mine. Strike that, reverse it. Now we're just doing Wonka bits. So my number 1 is, of course, The Swan. I want to flash back to the last time I saw both Jen and PT in person was at Celebration Anaheim, and Jen and I had to stand in a very long Ewan McGregor line. And at least when I was standing in the very long Ewan McGregor line, I saw Rupert Friend sitting at a table. And I don't know how his weekend was, but he was by himself at that moment because he'd only played one small part in one small Star Wars show. And some might say it's a little soon since we only met you Thursday night to pay lots of money for your autograph. But I would like to go back in time and apologize to Mr. Friend. And I would rush over to his table and get his autograph now because this was my favorite short, was The Swan, for all the reasons that have been said. And his performance was my absolute favorite. The physicality hasn't been shouted out, that he spends a lot of this kind of walking backwards, and everybody does some of this at different times. But I also thought the artifice was more on the surface here in ways I really enjoyed, that there were little hatches that popped open more frequently in this one, and it looked faker in a lot of ways. And I think that was really fun to be telling your most serious seeming story for at least 2/3 till the magical realism happens, but to kind of make it as fake as possible. And when the little boy appears behind him and the stagehand reaches out and has to, I think, take away, I want to say it's his bird, and then put his hands in bindings and so on. I just also want to shout out this, then to finish the Rupert Friend, my Zencaster name, which I'm now pointing to for people who can't see the video, is Rupert Friend's blue Converse, because they were awesome. That he was wearing some classic blue Chucks, and he was wearing a director's style suit, which I associate with Wes Anderson. And I believe that goes back to Wes Anderson's American Express commercial, which you could go find on YouTube, and is one of the many things that get counted on Letterboxd as Wes Anderson directed shorts, is his American Express commercial. I think it's pretty much the same suit. And it's, if I were to picture Wes Anderson, he would be wearing this, despite the recent photo of him with Benedict Cumberbatch, Emma from Harry Potter, what's her name? Emma Watson, and
Watson, yeah.
Somebody else. And Scarlett Johansson, looking just like the uncoolest guy at the cool kids table somehow. But I would still put him in this suit. And I take that to mean this is the one that Wes sees himself in. And I think it's pretty easy to believe Wes Anderson was bullied when he was little. Maybe not this extremely, but the fact that he would dress Rupert Friend as himself in this one is touching to me, and it is, I do think it goes on a little long. I also have to say it extends this weird subcurrent across so many of Wes Anderson's movies of animal cruelty, and obviously the Ratcatcher does too. But Tenenbaums kills a dog. Moonrise Kingdom kills a dog. I think Life Aquatic, they abandon a dog. Cody, no, Cody. We have to go back. No, we don't. And so there's just this odd streak of like a little darkness around kind of dead animals. And the Swan is kind of one of the more gruesome things, one of the more violent things. But it's very much like the dog in Moonrise Kingdom, that when in this case, it's dismembered. But when the dog is on screen, having been killed, it's kind of so fake, it's fake. But I thought this one was so much fun, and I do like the touch at the end that's magical realism, because I took that to that's a little bit of the Roald Dahl whimsy at this like dark moment. And I think sometimes in short stories, that's where an author will push something to his extreme. And I thought that was this one, and just retreated at the last moment to be like, I just can't quite do it. So that stood out to me, and is something I like in short fiction when authors do that. So, let's be dark sometimes, Wes Anderson. We like all that. Oh, also the snake was killed in Darjeeling Limited. I forgot that one. I was trying to count them all in my head. I don't think there's an animal in Grand Budapest. Is there? Jeff Goldblum. The most noble animal of the animal kingdom is Jeff Goldblum getting killed.
My conclusion from what you just said was that Wes Anderson must have had a very traumatic loss of a pet, or like grew up where people were mutilating animals or hunting or something like that, and it really traumatized him. Because if he's the stand-in for Rupert Friend in this one, right, and the horror almost more than the cruelty directly perpetrated to the little boy, right? He almost is more upset at the killing of the birds, right? Because the story opens with they have the string of the little birds that they like, and it's like really well described, I want to say, because they describe multiple birds that they've killed or at least name multiple types of birds, and then the swan. So the Swan's the title. I think you just explained my rankings, because the two with the traumatic animal things are at the bottom of my list. So,
well, and remember the little boy says, "Don't kill the swan." She could have cygnets in there, which I believe is the word for a baby swan. And so that's his concern. And what happens at the end, except the mom comes to comfort the little cygnet, right? Who has just flown. So it is a weird kind of parallel, a doubling, to steal PT's word from earlier. So
very traumatic for fans of the trumpeter Swan.
Oh, true.
I was one.
Rupert Friend is also underrated in Asteroid City too, as the country western singer.
Oh, yeah.
He's
I almost
so
forgot that
great.
was him.
So great. So more Rupert Friend everywhere. I'm a big fan now.
I mean, he might have won the Jeffrey Wright Award if he hadn't already been in Asteroid City. So he might have won in Asteroid City. So my Wonka double ha moment from what Greg was saying was realizing that he wants to apologize to Rupert Friend for not talking to him, but doesn't want to apologize to us for forgetting that we had lunch in Chicago during C's.
You're right. You're right.
But that's okay. That's all right. It was a good setup for the story.
There was so much poutine and so much chicken pot pie. It's all a blur. So
just a lot of carbs and gravy.
It was. But it was cold, so it was okay. We needed it.
And you guys got to go and see Ant-Man and the Wasp versus Quantumania or however the title is set up. A movie
we missed the first 20 minutes. And it didn't matter.
Still have not watched the first 20 minutes.
You still haven't gone back and watched it?
No, and it's only like we only missed like 10. It wasn't even that much.
Okay, well, with previews, I guess you're probably right.
Yeah, but I still haven't played it. Yeah,
it's fine. That movie's fine. It's not good, but it's not bad. So my number one, this is another Last Crusade versus Raiders of the Lost Ark moment where it's like everyone's so happy to zag away from the favorite that I got to sit here and be like, but the favorite is actually the right choice, or whatever. It's my choice, and it is Henry Sugar. as number one. I think maybe I'm just it's a size issue where I'm like, well, it's twice as long, it must be twice as good. But I do think it anchors this whole project. I don't think the other shorts work without it. So in that sense, I think it's important. It's the only one I think stands on its own. Whereas I think the other ones, like, you can watch them on their own and it's fine, but they don't really make sense without each other, and especially without this one. I will say, and this is not like a defense, but as sort of, I guess, my version, my interpretation, especially in light of some of the earlier conversation of what we've mentioned a couple of times, and then Jen was saying, was like, I don't know, I didn't like the moment where it was, here's the potential end, is that feels like that the extra part after this is what the end could be, it is what makes it a story, like Greg said earlier, of this is someone who, against their best wishes and intentions, grows because of Eastern philosophy and like becomes a better person. Because that moment, that like the story you're expecting, or the story you would expect, is the sort of traditional British mid 20th century version of a story, or at least mid 20th century story. That's the Twilight Zone episode, which is, here's this thing, this magical thing that you find out about, and you get this information, and you put all this work in, and you just get right to the point where you're finally going to get everything that you want, and you die. And it's like, just when you could possibly have gotten your dreams, it's like you break your glasses when you could read all the books. It's this like, oh, you're all the things that you worked towards was a waste because your life ended. But it's like, well, that's the easy ending. What if the ending is instead that all this energy and all this work I put into it, I actually grew and I learned and I could be a better person, and let me try to figure out how to do that. And maybe it's too long, and maybe there is actually, it feels like it's 5 minutes of him throwing money off the balcony. I don't know if it is actually that long, but it's like individual. I like that it's like one bill, and then you watch it float down, and then you hear someone be like, "Hey," and they're like, he's like, "You can keep it." They're like, "Okay," and then they like walk away, and he does it again with someone else, and then it's finally like, "All right, whatever." But I liked that. I thought that was funny enough to be worth the amount of time on it. And then, I did not expect the sort of branching out of, and all the costume changes of all the different disguises he was wearing when he took on different identities, that like sort of altruistic Catch Me If You Can beat of what was going on there. I just liked all of that. And I liked the way that, again, it told a story of, this person who, as alluded to in the intro, was like neither bad nor good, but just sort of this rich leech on society who was not really doing anything, learned through this what could be this sort of like, ooh, weird Eastern magic, but actually was like, oh, I guess centering myself and looking at things, I can realize that there's more to life than just trying to win some bets, and I should instead try to do something beneficial for the world. What a nice story, and what a nice thing to share. And I thought that it did a really good job of matching Wes Anderson matching that story to sort of his aesthetic and presentation of things. That is my number one.
I am now realizing that the opening quotes that I chose for both of you match your number ones.
Hey, nice job. Nice job.
What a good friend I am. Okay, so mine's Poison. I'm not going to say too much about it because we've already talked about it a lot, but as I type it in diligently into our chart. But for me, the suspense of this was really great, almost in like a Hitchcockian way. But it's like if this is Wes Anderson's version of Hitchcock, right? In some ways, because it's so tense for so long, and I just really love the ending of this. And I guess really, it's interesting that for me, the rankings really depended on how they ended and sort of what I took away from them at the end. Because this one, when it ended, it blew my mind, where I was like, and I guess this just means I'm a lot more gullible than PT, because I did not see that there was no snake coming. There was no evidence in the other shorts to indicate that this would be a bait and switch situation. And that, I was like, oh, there actually is a snake. Because like Henry Sugar is so meticulous about how medical it is. I mean, there are actual doctors in it, so that makes sense. But you know what I mean? Like, to me, that primed me to not really consider the option that there was no snake. And so when there is no snake, it really blew me away. And I was just like, what does this mean? This can mean so many things. And my mind started reeling of like the snake was actually a metaphor for like our fear of living. And like I went off the deep end with like trying to interpret this ending. And to me, it works on two levels. It has sort of this like existential, sort of philosophical, actually very, very Asteroid City sort of like contemplation of like, oh, this thing we were so terrified of actually doesn't even exist in the situation. And then I thought it was a really nice, we've talked about how the story in other ways was a really nice ending, like, or nice film to end the set on. And I feel like it also is that because when you reveal that the snake is not actually there, it goes back to the thing I was talking about earlier about like the tin is non-existent, right? Like if there's this lack or this empty space. I don't mean that in a Freudian way. I mean, I mean that like, I mean that in the sense of like, oh, this thing that we built this entire story around was actually never there, and it's just this empty space. So, and the idea of like visual representation versus like literary storytelling, and it like kind of really cinched everything together nicely for me. So that was why I ultimately picked it as. But Benedict Cumberbatch is actually not as good in this one, mostly because he doesn't have as much to do. He's lying and can't really speak for most of it, and he's so charming in Henry Sugar. So I almost switched them for that reason. But yeah. All right. So as we often find ourselves, we are at a crossroads where we have the Rhetorical Situation and we have Oscars watch, and we are 10 minutes away from hitting the 2-hour mark. I did want to come back to Netflix, though. So I think, why don't we just talk about that quickly? I won't do the whole pomp and circumstance of the Rhetorical Situation, but we did want to kind of talk about how these are being consumed. And in particular, what Greg was talking about at the top of the show, of that these aren't bundled together. I actually had a really hard time finding them when I went to go rewatch them, because like the algorithm had kind of recorded them as already watched, and so I had to like search for some. I had to like search for Wes Anderson in the search bar, and then they came up.
I will say, just because I didn't watch them when they came out, and I was looking for them recently, after they'd been out for a little while. There is a Roald Dahl collection now that was like a tile that was on the sort of recent things. There's like a Halloween one, and there's something else, maybe like Crown based, like something about the royalty, or maybe. But then there was Roald Dahl, and it's like they did a film version of Matilda the musical that came on Netflix as part of this deal. They had the Danny DeVito Matilda movie, and then these 4 shorts. So there is a way to sort of look at them together, but they're also not in sort of the release order. They're just jumbled in with the Matilda. So there is sort of a collection, but it's not like the Wes Anderson.
But it's not Wes Anderson. Yeah. Right. And to me, it seems it would make perfect sense to bundle these as a series. And if you listen to the Big Picture's most recent episode, they talked about this very briefly, and they sort of implied that Wes Anderson didn't want them to be bundled together, because then that would make it look like a TV series.
Oh.
I don't know what that was very much me reading kind of in between the lines of their conversation, that they sort of thought that. But like, so what do you make of this? Like, why do you think it's being presented this way? Why are they really making almost like an effort to separate them as opposed to bundle them together?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like, sorry, Greg. I feel like the reason that would make sense is like, oh, it's going to mean like more hits if they're in their own individual thing. It's going to have something better for the algorithm. But then if it's really hard to find, I don't know why you would do that. That seems to lose the benefits of, it's 4 things instead of 1 thing that could be pushed up to the front. So if that were the reason, they seem to be shooting themselves in the foot with it.
First, shout out to the Matilda musical. It slaps like hard. Like you are not ready for it. It is way better than you would expect it to be. Especially the actress whose name I'm forgetting. She was
Emma
in the
Thompson.
latest Bond. No, I know Emma Thompson. She was in the latest Bond movie. She was the new 007, and she was in the first Captain Marvel.
Oh,
Yes.
Lashonda Lynch?
Yeah,
Yes,
Lashana Lynch.
she's Miss Honey, and she's awesome. And the
that's
little
right,
girl
yeah.
is great too. But yeah, don't sleep on the Matilda musical. So I added a little bit to the rhetorical situation. And since Jen won't play the music, there he goes. When I teach rhetorical situation, I teach something that I have coined after years. I call it the big four and the little four. And so the big four are the decisions you make about what you need to write: the purpose, the audience, the thesis, and the persona. You kind of set up those four things initially. And then in order to achieve that, you make decisions in the little four. And the little four are medium, genre, style, and design. This is not revolutionary, but this is just my personal way to organize my lectures. And so I focus in on medium here because medium is where I think students don't often pay a lot of attention to it because it doesn't come up in the classroom that often. But I always tell them medium is the method of transmission, right? So you have this thing that you need to say. And so the medium becomes how you say it. You want to quit your job. You can send a tasteful email. You can ask to talk to your boss in person, or you could flip the double birds and jump out the airplane door as that guy did years and years ago. I think he grabbed 2 beers and then he jumped out the emergency slide of his airplane. And so I was thinking about this question around that. And I think medium is really interesting here. So Wes Anderson created this thing, right? And he did his normal Wes Anderson thing. And it could have been transmitted to us in movie theaters. It could have been a theatrical experience, and we could have all sat and watched it all together, PT style, I think it's called. It's like the Machete Order, but now it's PT style. We could have had this presented as an anthology. And that makes a lot of sense because it would further mimic the short story form, right? That short stories don't really get published on their own, sometimes in magazines, as people know. But often it's like, here's a batch that I've experimented with over the years, and let's put this together in some kind of anthology of a certain time period or a certain set of themes, and we'll call that an anthology. This to me screams, make it look like an anthology, right? Make it appear on Netflix like the Roald Dahl films of Wes Anderson. And so the question I think that you brought up, Jen, in terms of big picture is right. It's like, well, whose decision was this? Because PT's answer is kind of like, it's probably Netflix's decision, right? And I'm open to the question, right? Like I have no idea whether it is. And so trying to understand why you would want these very separate is curious to me. I think to sneak in our Oscars watch, there might be eligibility things within that. I really don't know the rules around short films. I know sometimes when a musician makes a music video, that can count. So I assume there's ways in which you can remove something from an anthology to have it count. Or he really thinks of these as their own individual things. And as I understand it, these 4 stories were not in a single anthology. And the title cards at the end make it clear they were written in different periods of Roald Dahl's career. So if this comes down to Wes Anderson's artistic vision as opposed to the needs of the algorithm, I think what he's trying to do here is kind of further nest them in some weird way, right? Like it's almost like another layer that they're all on their own and you have to interpret these separately, even though they are so heavily related. Everything PT said earlier about how if you watch the wrong one first, you're like, why is Ray Fiennes here for 2 seconds in a weird little hut? So I'm thinking a lot about that, right? And I think that then becomes a question of, you took a short story and you turned it, let's just fudge the details and say you turned it into a stage production that you then turned into a short film. That is a person who's really interested in what each kind of medium can deliver for a specific theme or a specific piece of content. And then to then add that on to not just a short film, he premiered Henry Sugar at Venice. He presented it as just a short film, but you're fitting that into this new ecosystem of streaming and how you make these things available and how people get that content. I think it's kind of another way to interrogate the formalist side of how this art process happens. That's my rant on medium. Coming soon to my classroom.
Because then it's like the because then it's actually the arrangement of this and the presentation of it is saying it's extending the theme of the stories themselves and Wes Anderson's sort of a formalist project to streaming, right? It's like this is a new medium. It's actually making a statement about that, I think, right? Like that when you put something on a streaming service, it is a different medium than if you watch it in a theater or, like saw it on a DVD or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, I really like that. That's really
was a prestige cable show. Like, I think it is separating from that genre as well, that medium as well. Sorry.
I will say, to steamroll that we will go to at Oscars Watch, because the other research we will. Besides looking up the story, is figuring out what some of the rules are about short films. And I do think that the evolution from what sort of I remember, and then from what to sort of tracking, this part isn't deep research, it's just tracking the Wikipedia page of like how it evolved, was that it was sort of like, there's a new Wes Anderson movie, that's the Henry Sugar movie. And then it was, well, it's going to be just this one short film. Actually, it's a short film with these, 4 short films. So there's 3 additional ones. It feels to me very clearly that for a while, when this was being assembled, it was going to be like French Dispatch, as we said earlier, a little collection, like one sort of hour 30, hour 40-minute collection of things, all sort of presented as one unit. But one of the main qualifying rules for a short film is it cannot be more than 40 minutes. And The Wonderful World of Henry Sugar is 37 minutes. And so it's just sort of like, okay, if this is presented on its own, this can qualify in that category, which, certainly when they were making these decisions, it was like, well, both of these Wes Anderson movies are just going to cancel each other out if there's a push for, feature awards. So maybe that was the crass decision that was made. Although I like all the things that Greg was saying about the actual creative, artistic, craft decision of craft versus crass of making this a collection of short films that sort of exist on their own, that are bite-sized things that you have to sort of do the work to link them together, instead of just having it fed to you as like, next episode will play in 5 seconds because you finished the previous one.
It didn't even suggest them to me, just to pinpoint that as well. Like, I finished the first one. It's like, don't you want to watch Love is Blind? I'm like, what? Reptile? No. Like, serve me the next Wes Anderson short. Like, if you're going to force it. A couple of them did
pop up for me, but I don't think it was in any order, discernible order. It was just random. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, it's really interesting because like it couldn't just be like Wes Anderson shorts and then they're all there. Like it was like you had to actively work hard to find them, which was from a viewer's
get out of my Google
history.
Kind of my sartorial choices are my own. Just because I search for Wes Anderson shorts, that's my business, not yours.
The tiny mouse in the Netflix algorithm was like, Greg Cass, he doesn't like Wes Anderson. Let's give him something else.
He's a Love is Blind type of fella.
Oh boy. The last thing I'll say with this, and then we'll move more fully into Oscars Watch that PT just teased, is that the other thing we haven't really talked about is that to me, a lot of these shorts, because the way that they engage with Roald Dahl, not only as an author as portrayed by Ray Fiennes, but in the annotations, right? We get extra little bits of information about these stories, and usually at the end, right? But like we get additional information that then recontextualizes what we've seen. And I feel like that the choice to then have them be all separate as opposed to kind of like fluidly you watch one after the other, like making it so that we all watch them all in a certain order or something like that, I think really speaks to that idea of like they're just little blips, like they're each their own kind of project. He like, as opposed to kind of like, this is what I have to. And so maybe he has less to say about Roald Dahl in that sense, right? Like where it's like, this is not, I've chosen these 4 stories and here's my grand statement about Roald Dahl's contribution to literature or something like that, right? Yeah. All right. So Oscars Watch, we've talked about it a little bit, but PT, do you want to just like give us the lowdown on?
I would love to.
Okay, go for it.
I put too much time into this instead of going to bed last night. So I will say this, that this is all sort of stemming from, as we sort of just said, of like, there's this speculation or sort of thought of, oh, well, this could be, Wes Anderson, who has never won an Academy Award. I don't think he, like Grand Budapest won some, but he did not actually win one. just some things for his movie. So, could this be sort of a play that the short film, he'll be aiming to do that. And when we briefly touched upon it back when Greg lamented we will never have an episode about it, and now 2 hours later, look at us now. But Greg was like, I don't know if that ever works. Like that never, people never get a short live action short award in the middle or towards the end of their career. Like after it's gotten going, that's like a precursor maybe when they're setting it up. So I was curious about that, which led me into doing way too much of a deep dive about it. So I'll try to be real brief here. Just because I didn't know this in terms of qualifications for live action short, it's very different from, it's carved out as being different from the rules for feature film. One is that it must be shorter than 40 minutes. So I believe the Almodovar short that is also potentially going to be nominated also is like 39 minutes. It's right there pushing the limit here. There's the qualifying period is for 2 years instead of 1. So it's basically like movies for this upcoming Oscars could have come out starting in October of 2022. And so, it's, I think because the path usually goes through a lot of festivals, that it takes a little while for it to start to get attention and do that. So that's a thing there. There's like different little details about a qualifying run. It does have to be in a theater. It can go through a festival. It can go through a sort of Student Academy Awards thing that people can go and look up if they want to. That was too much detail for me to record, but just note that I did in an Evernote file. And if anyone, contact the Long Take Review on Instagram or over Gmail if you want more information.
If you want to do a post on the Long Take Substack, just about all this research that you did.
Maybe when we get a little bit closer to the,
okay.
I'll dig back into this. That's a great point. So just in terms of briefly the history of the award, there's been an equivalent award to this all the way back to the 5th Academy Awards in 1932. Wow. So it had some different names. It started as Best Short Subject Comedy and Best Short Subject Novelty, which from our perspective sounds very similar. Apparently novelty was like, that was the term that was being used that ended up being like documentaries and nature films that didn't last very long as the term. And it sort of shifted over to just being documentary short down the way. The first short that won in the Best Short Subject Comedy was the Laurel and Hardy short, The Music Box, which anyone who's been in LA, the Music Box Steps is the landmarked location because it was used in that short and is right by Laurel and Hardy Park in Silver Lake. That's some local news.
I didn't know that.
Well, there you go. You can go and see it. It's them trying to get a piano up a long flight of stairs in Silver Lake. And I've watched it. It's pretty funny. It holds up. Good short. I haven't watched it in a long time, so I said that, and now I'm concerned there's something deeply problematic somewhere in there. But my memory when I watched it right after I moved to LA was that it was still funny. It evolved over time. There was one reel and 2 reels. There was sort of how much film was actually used. Separated the categories until the mid 50s, and then it just has become live action short film. Even though there's been a best documentary short since the early 40s, documentary still dominated in this category for a while until the 70s, the early 70s. They were like, okay, it can't be a documentary. All right. Like you just can't have it. And I couldn't find why. The only answer I could piece together was looking at the process now, which is that the best documentary short goes through the documentary branch of as a nomination branch to get to the nominees. Whereas everyone in the Academy votes for live action short. So I guess everyone back in the day liked documentaries too, and so also included them in the ways things go. Would either of you like to take a guess of who has won the most Oscars for live action short? This seems like a question you shouldn't know the answer to, but then you won't be surprised when you hear what it is. I'll frame it another way. Who has won the most Academy Awards? Period.
Walt Disney.
Walt Disney. It is Walt Disney because the way that and up till now it still is, it's 1 or 2 people who have the most creative input to whatever is done. So there were a lot of, because of the way Walt Disney ran his company, there were a lot of things that were, again, nature documentaries or random kind of slice of life things made by presumably individual filmmakers, but got submitted under Walt Disney's name. So he was nominated 13 times and won 6. over the course of his life. So there have been a lot of random people who have won. As Jen teased, maybe this will become a post at some point down the road. I want to just zoom in on one year where, which I think does a good job of encapsulating all the sort of weirdness that can come out when you're looking back in time. So in 1994, the same year as Pulp Fiction and Forrest Gump, up in the top, the nominees included Jo Beth Williams, who is the mom from Poltergeist, who directed a short called On Hope. Sean Astin, Samwise Gamgee, who is an Oscar nominee for a short called Kangaroo Court. And there were two winners that year. It was a tie. One of them was a short called Franz Kafka's It's a Wonderful Life. Top-notch, exceptional name. Won by Peter Capaldi, a former Doctor Who and star of The Thick of It, Academy Award winner. Yes, correct. A former star of Doctor Who was the Doctor. And that won in a tie with a short film called Trevor. The winning producers of that created the Trevor Project as a follow-up to this story of a gay youth. So all kinds of weird things happen in a given year. But to go back to sort of the, like, is this something that people win in order to like launch a career? It's happened a few times. Taylor Hackford, who directed An Officer and a Gentleman and Ray and a bunch of other movies, won in 1978. David Frankel, who did Devil Wears Prada and Marley and Me, not really an Academy Award maybe level movie, but he's done a bunch of movies, won in 1996. Andrea Arnold, who did Fish Tank and American Honey, won for a short film in 2003. And Martin McDonagh, In Bruges, Three Billboards, and Banshees of Inisherin, won in 2005. So we've got some people who won beforehand, but there's only been a couple who have won after fame, and they're not exactly like at the level of a Wes Anderson. There's a documentary filmmaker named Marshall Curry who had been nominated for 2 documentary features and 1 documentary short before finally winning in 2019 for a live action fictional short film called The Neighbor's Window. And Terry George, who was nominated in screenwriting for In the Name of the Father and Hotel Rwanda, won in 2011 for something called The Shore. So there have been nominees who were sort of post-famous. Saul Bass, after designing all the title sequences and film posters, got a bunch of nominations in short films in the late 70s, both in live action and one in documentary. He actually won the documentary one. Kenneth Branagh, after Henry V, got a nomination in 1992 for Swan Song, so he'd been nominated a few times. And Alfonso Cuarón, after already winning a bunch, was nominated last year.
Yeah.
La Pupille, or La Pupil, I'm not sure the direct pronunciation. So it's possible. I feel like it's possible. There's a little window there, and the last few years have kind of seen an uptick in maybe some like, oh, okay, maybe it's kind of a career award for someone who's been around the block, got some nominations. We can maybe give them a little something. So it's possible. The path's there for Wes to maybe get a little something, get a little taste of Oscar glory.
And I feel like it would be fitting, given his past history of never winning, that this would be, and it speaks to what we started out in the non-spoiler section of like, maybe this is the right dose of Wes Anderson being Wes Anderson, that people, if they're a little kind of like, I'm not that into it, or I don't have a lot of tolerance for it, it's like the perfect amount. And so I wonder if that will play with that might be why he hasn't won yet. And that maybe what would make this a better chance for him to win. But I feel like in general, it sounds like this year is going to be weird because we have what PT's talking about, kind of like a less precedented or unusual pool of nominees, where between Wes Anderson and Pedro Almodovar, like it's like just a lot of heavyweights in a category that never has any heavyweights usually. I guess with the exception of last year, but just wanted to mention, because we've mentioned Pedro Almodovar's short a couple times, but if people don't know what it is, it's Ethan Hawke and Pedro Pascal as cowboy lovers. So like, if you're still listening to us and we're starting to lose you, like, you have that to look forward to at least. And apparently they're very well dressed. Like I've heard people gushing about the costumes in that short. So like at first, I think my initial reaction was like, well, these can't get nominated because these people are too big. PT sort of gone down a rabbit hole to confirm that that's not a crazy idea. But it is going to be a weird year because it's like, well, obviously it's going to be hard for them in a category that already goes to the one that people have heard of the most, or like the people with big names attached to it usually win the shorts categories, right? Like if there's an Obama attached as a producer, like that's more likely to win, or at least a lot of people theorize that in many years that they've had that. And, you know, so it'll be interesting to see what the other nominees are in the category, which I think no one knows yet what that would be, or no one has any idea what that would be.
I do wonder if the combination of Wes Anderson, well-known filmmaker with many other nominations, and the studio Netflix campaigning for this is actually going to be a negative if it gets down to Wes Anderson, even if it's also Pedro Almodovar, and then 3 up-and-comers who we don't know about. Maybe folks will be like, well, maybe we should vote for one of these randos instead. But we don't know. I mean, again, this is a really good short. So, and maybe the fact that more people will see it because it's a famous name gives it momentum, but I think there also might be blowback to that, where they'll be like, I saw that on Netflix months ago. Like, this doesn't need any more attention. Like, it's fine. Whereas this might be a leg up for someone else's career.
I just want to chip in. I love Wes Anderson. I really want him to have an Oscar, but not like this. I
not
want,
like this.
I really would prefer. I think I said in the lead up to Asteroid City, like, the buzz was that was his opus and it was going to be great. It wasn't great. It was good and I like it a lot, but it wasn't like among his other films. I wouldn't put that at the top. So it feels to me like we're still waiting. And I do worry that Grand Budapest was the year he had the best shot and now he's never going to quite hit that level again. But I prefer, this is just me as a guy who watches all the Oscar movies, I prefer when it's an up-and-comer. I think that's the spirit of it, right? It's like a proof of concept. I can do this. I have a good eye. I have good ideas. Give it to me, and then they can leverage that to get a good budget somewhere and get a first feature. I will say again, I've watched all the shorts many years in a row now. I want to just endorse that now. Plan your February so that when they come to theaters, I always go on one night. You can go, and it's usually under 2 hours for each of the live action and the animated, and you can see them all, across like 3 hours or so. It's a great time. It's really fun. Or split it up into 2 nights. Almost always the one with the most famous actor wins, but it is often just one famous actor. The year the Riz Ahmed one won, it was like, oh, nobody I recognize ever. It's like, oh, here's Riz Ahmed. The year before that was one called The Apartment, which I think had a New Yorker tie, but it was like, oh, there's the sister from Orange is the New Black. I know her. Let's all vote for this one. So it like used to not take a lot of celebrity, with no offense intended to the actress who played the sister on Orange is the New Black. But like it used to not take much. And now it's like, I think PT asked the right question. It's like, is all of this going to just turn off the voters and they'll be like, get out of our category, big name actors and so on? Or, are they going to be wowed by the star power? I think it is going to be Henry Sugar. And I think I have heard nobody question that. So I assume Netflix signaled that somewhere, and maybe it was that was the one that premiered at Venice. But it seems to me that people are going to be wowed not just by the actors and the writing, but the set design, everything we talked about, right? Everything that makes it incredible makes it a really good form of the short. And so all of that being said, if this leads to a revolution in the short form, and this is perfect for streaming, right? It doesn't matter what the runtime is. Everybody can throw some shorts on and different people can try it out. I think this would be great for the short film art form, never mind the Oscar race.
Yeah. And I've heard critics complain about the proof of concept thing to be like, why don't you just make a movie? Like that, like a lot of them get frustrated with the idea that we have to try out something as a short film when really it should be a full feature. And so I think it'd be interesting if this sparked a turn so that it's like short film really means a film that should be in short form and can only be in, like, the story is best told in a short form, as opposed to like, oh, this is a short to give you a taste and want a feature. I think that could be really cool, because that would actually justify having the short film category at the Oscars more. Because right now it really sticks out in a way that I think, at least in the ceremony, doesn't make sense.
Well, and it'll be interesting if this sort of gambit is successful for either Wes Anderson or Pedro Almodovar, because then is it going to be, Ridley Scott's never gotten an Oscar. He's going to make a couple of short films next year to see if he can get his way in. Like, that's the way to do it. Like, is that going to be good or bad? Does that mean that like people are going to want to watch 30-minute, 35-minute short films again? Are they going to get some prominence in the streaming site, or is it just going to crowd people out? And, and maybe because of the change of technology and the change of access to, you don't need to buy however many feet, miles of film to make your own film. You just need like a, good hard drive that, go and make a full feature instead of a short film now. But yeah, it is interesting that like this could be a pivot point for that category and what it means for the industry as a whole. I shouldn't say industry, for the culture of filmmaking.
All right. Well, once again, we conjectured that this would be a shorter episode because we're talking about shorts. There was nothing short about this episode. So we think we're going to end here. PT, where can folks find the Long Take Review?
They can find us on both Instagram and Threads at the Long Take Review. And if they would like to contact us, send us an email, give us any feedback or suggestions, thelongtakereview@gmail.com.
And Greg, where can everyone find the great work that you do when you're not here?
I am on Instagram and Threads as well at EyonCanon, EYEONCANON. Also ioncanon.com. Also Obi-Wan Cast on Letterboxd. I'm just going to keep plugging the Letterboxd. Everybody should turn into Letterboxd bros because it's fun over there. So thank you for having me on. Really, when Jen said, would you like to talk about the Wes Anderson shorts, I didn't let her finish the question before I said yes and had already logged on to the Zencast. So I'm glad we found time for this one, and really looking forward to award season ahead. As you plugged at the beginning of the episode, we've got some good stuff coming up.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And you can find me at Sopchockchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, on Instagram and Threads. And you can find me at Qui-Gon Jen on Letterboxd. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, folks.
Ironic, it's not a short episode about shorts.
It's four
Still
things.
Not the Short Take Review. It's not the
That's
Short Take
true.
Review.
That's right. We're not called the Long Take Review for nothing. Thank you for listening. You can follow The Long Take on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive reviews of films with Oscar buzz, as well as new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.